Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a nice lunch and coffee for 2 more presentations this evening. What I'm going to present today, along with Huyen, who is an early career researcher from Vietnam, are the results of the Needs and Resources Assessment. It has a long name on the slide, addressing violence against children, mapping the needs and resources in 8 cities across the world. But we call it NARA report. And this is finally the printed version of this huge, I would say, titanic effort to put together the writing of a lot of co-authors. If you check just the first page, well, the second one, you will see the names of everyone who was involved in writing this report. And I should say that this is absolutely true. All the names here are participants who say something, who wrote something for this report. So it's quite thin, but putting all our ideas together and make them coherent and organized was a titanic effort. I don't know if we are going to be successful at explaining all the information we have gathered, because at the end it was a lot of information. But I'm really sure that after this presentation you can read the report yourself and get more details. So let's start with some basic ideas, some background and aims. I wasn't at the very beginning of the study, but I think one of the questions that was always there was, okay, we have 8 sites, but where is this EBLS study set? What is happening in these 8 sites? Are they different? Are they similar? We started thinking that they are all low and middle income countries, but that's not enough to say that they are homogeneous. As you know, the 8 cities included in our study, they all represent the whole region, and they capture significant variation. That's something which have been said a lot of times during this day. They capture significant variation in social, cultural, and religious backgrounds. Just by looking at the map, you can have an idea that this is something quite broad. There are many different cultures, different economic systems involved in this selection of countries. If we go in deep, a little bit more detail, and we check some of the characteristics of these cities, we can realize that they are different in terms of challenges and priorities. Let's, for instance, check the size of the cities. They are urban places, but not necessarily they all have the same number of population. If you look at the GDP in the idea of trying to capture economic differences across country, you can see enormous variation between Cluj-Napoca and Talai. The same happens with the Gini index. The same happens with gender inequality. If you check the index, in Koforidua you have 53.8%, whereas in other countries or in other sites like Ragama in Sri Lanka, Cluj-Napoca and Worcester, the index is lower. I have to say that Cluj-Napoca in different variables seems to be a little bit more advantaged or more privileged than the rest of the sites. But there are some characteristics where other sites are quite similar to Cluj-Napoca. For instance, in terms of the Gini index or in terms of the gender inequality, where it seems to be quite close to Cluj-Napoca. So we realized that it was necessary to have more details on what made these cities similar or different. early in the process of developing EBLS, the idea of having a needs and resources assessment was accepted and was recognized that something should happen. Basically, the aim of the report is to offer an initial overview of the main resources in each city, identify or try to map out the major gaps and challenges, identify those aspects that should be a priority for policy and also for our research interests. We wanted to compare the cities and finally produce some evidence that allows the sites to monitor policy change across years. It wasn't a simple task because information was not easy to collect. So we tried to develop a method that allows us to compare information. First of all, when you have a large team, as we have in different countries, different cultures, speaking different languages, we needed to develop a protocol which allows us to focus on what we wanted to do and what kind of information we wanted to collect. First of all, we conducted some expert interviews in every single site. In total, we had 56 participants representing the government and non-governmental sectors. Some of them were program planners or policymakers, whereas others were implementing policies. At the same time, sites develop a desk review. They collect information, international indexes, local information, local data that allows to understand how violence was affecting women and children. It's been well accepted now that intimate partner violence is also an expression or a form of violence against children. So we didn't want to get focused only on the child. We wanted to understand how violence affects also the mothers. We had the data from the pilot, the data that Manuel presented in the session during this morning. And once we have collected all these interviews and we have revised all the documentation, we thought that it was going to be interesting to triangulate some of our information, the qualitative data combined with the results of the pilot. As you all know, the pilot has some limitations. Our data, we are not claiming that our data is representative of the country or the city. We have 150 participants who were collected for the purpose of the pilot. But we think that this is a fair step. If this data has something to say, we thought that it was important to integrate the results in the narrative report. So we ended up with a lot of information, not just interviews, not just the revision of documents and pilot data. So it was necessary to organize all this information in a way that it was more easy to understand. This has been always a challenge in this project. We have 8 sites and we try to put together sites which are different. So we need to capture these elements which are in common and also those elements that allows us to identify particular issues. So we ended up with these tables. You can check the table because it's not big here, but you can check the tables in page 30. What we did basically was taking all the information we have collected and organize this information based on the 7 strategies suggested by the INSPIRE framework. As you know, these 7 strategies are evidence-based, and it's supposed that if we target these strategies, we could do something to reduce violence against children. So we thought that it was kind of the the backbone of all the data we have collected. And at the end of the day, it demonstrated to help to organize this information. So for each strategy, for instance, the first one, implementation and enforcement of law, we describe resources and strengths. The darker color represent the resources, and the lighter colors represent those areas where we have challenges. So just to give you an example, in the strategy implementation and enforcement of laws, the ratification of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, it's quite successful in everywhere, but it's a little bit more difficult when it comes to action plans and enforcement of the legislation. The same happened with the challenges and gaps and with the recommendations. But I'm not going to force you to check these tables. I'm just going to tell you with Huyen what we found. First strategy, implementation and enforcement of law. The INSPIRE framework says that if we are capable of changing some laws to reduce violence against children, we can effectively move on the agenda of the SDG. So the main finding here is that in all study sites, legislators have embedded principles of the UNCRC in the national laws. I think it's more difficult when it comes to the making this real and endorsing these laws. In all sites, corporal punishment in schools has been forbidden, which is a positive aspect. In some of the sites, this has happened just recently, like in Ghana, whereas in others, it has been a long story of prohibition of corporal punishment in schools. In terms of gaps, we found that parental corporal punishment remains permissible in Sri Lanka, Pakistan, South Africa, and Jamaica. And the expert agreed on the idea that existing laws were insufficient or insufficiently implemented and enforced in their sites. Therefore, the recommendations are related with the idea of promote the enforcement of existing laws, and more than that, developing strategic, local and national action plans that allows to make these ideas real. The second strategy described in the INSPIRE framework is related with norms and values. INSPIRE suggests that strengthening norms and values that support non-violent gender equitable relationships can help to reduce the acceptance of violence against children. It's been tested in previous research that beliefs supporting violence are highly correlated with actual behaviors. So when we explore this based on expert interviews and the pilot data, we found that the sites reported limited ability to address norms and values that support violence against children. This was also evident in our data, in the pilot data. Manuel has just shown you this slide. These are 3 questions of an instrument measuring attitude towards corporal punishment. And as you can see here, in many of the sites, there were a huge support of these kind of beliefs. For instance, one of the items says, spanking is a sign that parents love their children. 40% overall agreed with this statement, and the highest support was observed in Worcester. Then, spanking does not harm children. That was another statement. 34% overall supported this belief, with the highest support in Worcester again, and Huyen. So If our data is correct, it seems that here we have room to do something about reducing violence. The strategy number 3, safe environments. Safe environments, or creating safe streets and physical places where children can grow up and develop, seems to be relevant for the reduction of violence against children. Again, we found in our data that Worcester and Kingston in Jamaica reported the higher levels of street violence, drugs, or presence of gangs. In Huyen, Ragama, Worcester, and Koforidwa, experts said that reducing the availability of drugs and alcohol could help to create safer places. In terms of gaps, we think that we don't have detailed data on where it is happening, where exactly, and how those living in those areas are affected by this insecurity or unsafe environment. And one of the recommendations is related with the idea of using technology for identifying, geocoding these areas, and trying to understand how this environmental violence can have an impact in the development of children. In terms of strategy number 4, well, as said by the INSPIRE framework, research shows that improving families' financial security and stability can contribute to reducing child maltreatment and IPV. So we wanted to understand what was the situation in every side. Experts emphasize the importance of strategies that address gender inequality, spatial segregation, poverty, poor housing, unstable or unreliable and corrupt state agencies. That was a general conclusion of the experts who were interviewed for this report. But we also wanted to explore a little bit our data. We have a lot of items and indicators about socioeconomic background. But just for the case of the NARA report, we wanted to check the access to sanitation levels in these different countries, in these different sites. So we check 3 basic stuff: on flush toilet, piped water, access to piped water, and and we wanted to check if the household has access to refrigeration. It was quite high in most of the sites. So this is one of the strengths probably we have observed here. However, there are some exceptions, like here, Valenzuela. Only 50% of participants mentioned that they had access to their own flush toilet. The same happened with the access to piped water. So those are preliminary indicators of the access that families have to goods and well-being. We found that there was a lack of income strengthening strategies like microfinance and income programs. That seems to be a substantial gap in many of the sites. It's been one of the evidence-based strategies. There are some meta-analyses suggesting that this could be helpful. However, we didn't find this kind of programs in the EBLS side. So we think we need to further analyze the extent to which poverty and social inequality is playing a role in the main outcomes we are checking with EBLS. How inequality is having an impact in the lives of children and women. And now Huyen is going to finish with the rest of the INSPIRE strategies.
Thank you, Sara, for very, very good presentation and very kind introduction from me. So I will very happy to take over the next couple of strategy regarding to the Inspire framework. Okay, here it is. So I will continue with the next strategy is regarding to parent and caregiver support. So the main purpose of parent and caregiver support thus is aimed to reduce the harsh parenting practice in the family against children. So in our study, based on the interview with expert and clinician, we found that across the study side, they emphasize that there is a lack of parenting support in each country. So the parenting support should be put in the top priority. And yeah, it can be understandable because there are so many reasons and contextual factors affect the parenting support in the family. It might be connected to the social norm, the social acceptability of corporal punishment that Sara has just mentioned. That 40% of women, of participants in a country agree that corporal punishment is the good way to make the children become well behaved, or this is the method to express their love with their own children. And so that's why and another reason we also witnessed from the pilot study that Manuel had just presented this morning. This is about 80% of mothers decline to call happy thing with their biological father of the family. So here we can see that there is the role of the father in the family might affect the parenting practice in the family. So we think that there is a significant gap in parenting intervention between a countryside, and the evidence-based and culturally adapting parenting support is very important because you can see that there is a widely difference of cultural factor between every country, and we are highly recommend that the evidence-based parenting intervention is can be streamed into the existing services, and it should be supported by the local or community leader to make this kind of intervention become widely accessibility by the community. So the next slide, I would like to explain how we can better support and respond to the victim of violence against children and women. So this kind of strategy from Inspire's framework, which aim to try our best to provide the high quality of health service, the criminal justice service, and the welfare services for the survivor of violence, including the women and children. So we found that there is a significant gap in a country regarding to the response and support services is put in the place, but the effectiveness is questionable. Because why? Because the women or the children, they very difficult to access this kind of services. For example, when the woman or when the children who are experiencing violence, they come to the health clinic, but they just be treated like a normal patient without any specific services for to help them overcome this negative experience. For example, the mental health counseling, or maybe we even don't have any treatment for perpetrator. And then we we see that this kind of response and support services in our system is also be weakened by the M&E, I mean that the monitoring and reporting system to identify the cases who experience violence against children and women. And we also have restricted access to the available services and support because the system, they don't have well resources to adapt or to respond with the need of the victim of violence. For example, the healthcare worker or the policeman or the justice officer, they don't have well training, they don't have the clinical guideline to help them how to respond with the victim of violence, and they just based on their ad hoc way, and this is affect the way we can better support for victim of violence. So our recommendation is that this is the key point for the system. It must be changed. It must be improved to meet the truly need of the victim of violence. So it might be we can apply some kind of hotline or provide a temporary shelter for victim of violence against children and women. And so it might be provide clinical guideline or provide training, including the training for skill, so it can better high quality care for victimization of violence. This is the last strategy that I want to emphasize regarding to education and life skill. And this is very important because we already have discussed about the gender equality. So we already know that the main reason of violence is come from the gender equality. So the purpose of education and life skill that we try to provide the equal chance for both the boy and the girl and the woman and the man, the equal chance to access education, to provide well knowledge and awareness for community, so they can respond, they can treat with the woman, with the young girl equally. So we thought that our study, the NARA study, we thought that there is a lack of quality life skill training for children in all age group. And of course, the life skill is very important because the training in the school can equip the children that how they can protect themselves from the school, in the family, or in the neighbor. So that's why we think that in the future, the life skill training for children should be emphasized, should be provide good outcome for the early intervention. So that is all about what we got in this report. This a couple of slides that I want to present here is not in the report because this is the additional add-on. I mean that the further study in Huyen City. So why we conduct this kind of study, this is an additional because that's what we have here is based on the interview with the expert only. But we are curious that what the woman will say about what type of resources that they really need. So that's why we, in addition with the interview with expert, we conduct, at the end of the EBLS foundation study interview with the 150 pregnant women, we asked some similar questions with the expert, and we asked them to individually rate 7 inspired framework components based on the semi-structural question, and we compare the score based on this kind of question, and we ask the women how they can actually experience in their pregnancy. So here you can see that this is the 7 Inspire framework, but because we apply in the pregnant woman, so we have a little bit adaptation with the strategy 5. In the original Inspire framework is the parent and caregiver support, but here we try to understand the role of the father and partner, so we change the question a little bit to partner support. And then we compare the score between mother and the key informant, and we're using the coin D. The coin D is to compare what is the significant difference component between the mother's perspective and the key informant perspective. And if the coin D is more than 0.8, so it means that this component will significantly different. So here you can see that there is 2 components have significantly different. So I will show you the radar diagram for better visual view. So here is the 7 Inspire component or strategy. So we have the score from 0 to 10, with 0 is mean that this kind of services is very good, it's no problem. And for the score 10, it means that the problem is the service, this kind of service is very poor or problematic. And here is what the score from the key informant perspective. And we compare with the score that's generated from data from mother perspective. And here you can see that there is 5 of 7 components have a good agreement, including the norm and value, safe environment, income and economic strengthening, response and support services, and education and skill. However, there is 2 components here. There is a significantly difference between the expert's perspective and mother perspective. And perhaps surprisingly that the woman may perceive that they think that they experience fewer support from their partner or husband, while the key informant, they think that the problem is come from the system, the implementation and enforcement of the law. So here we can see that the mother response and rating has been used to validate what the expert said about the importance of the service regarding to violence. So that's all that I want to present, and I will give back the stage for Sara for a nice conclusion.
Just a few words as a conclusion. As you can see, probably the picture is not fully complete yet. As Huyen explained, when you ask the mothers, probably there are some few differences, but we are getting close to the needs and resources of the site. Just a few ideas to finish this presentation. It seems that the framework, the Inspire framework, can help us to map out needs and resources. It's not just a set of strategies. It helps us to monitor and evaluate what is the situation in each country. In terms of research implications, EBLS would produce data that captures and explains the variation across sites. And this is going to be a big challenge. We are always in the tension of doing this coherent, getting comparable data, but at the same time, understanding particularities in each country. And finally, as a policy implication, diversity across sites suggests that we need to develop tailored interventions. It's not just testing interventions in low and middle income countries and implementing them. It seems that we have a lot of variation between and within